Why do we call it Good Friday?
Why do we call it Good Friday? Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's one that I've wrestled with too, because historically Good Friday is known as the day when Jesus was brutally murdered on a cross. So how could something so evil and so horrible like murder be known throughout history as something that is truly good? And maybe you've asked questions like this before, like how can a good God exist in the midst of all the terrible things I'm going through right now? Or if you consider yourself a Christ follower, maybe your faith has been challenged, whether by yourself or by other people, like saying things like, why or how can an all good and all powerful God exist in the midst of all the evil that we're experiencing in our world? And so we have trouble reconciling how evil can have an outcome of good. We really wrestle with that tension, and in order to reconcile that tension, we need to look at why Jesus did what he did and how that affects you and me and what we're going through right now. I became a dad recently, and for all of you parents out there, you know the joy that it brings, the love that you never knew you could possibly have for another person, but at the same time, it also brings this certain level of fear, anxiety, even depression and worry that's like, I don't really see this going away, at least anytime soon. My family, my extended family is going through this really tumultuous time that seems to kind of happen every 4 or 5 years, and it cycles through and it cycles through, and you kind of just start to wonder, is this our existence now? And then throw into the mix the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's just one of those things that's like, you wake up every day in this season and you feel like there's something new, and the thing that you were dealing with yesterday hasn't gone away, and so now something new is added on top of that. And so I think for me, and the question, this Good Friday question for me right now is, how in the midst of all of this can it really be good? How can I, or how can we, how can you find hope? Well, I think part of the good news about Good Friday is that Jesus, in the midst of your sorrow, in the midst of our collective sorrow, knows what you and I feel. Jesus knows what we feel because he felt it too. You see, our God is not distant. Jesus is not immune to our pain. He feels it too. And the crazy thing about Good Friday is Jesus chose to do it. Jesus chose to feel our pain simply so that we could know that we have a God who understands our pain. Isaiah 53:3 puts it this way: He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. I think we would all say that we'd love a life with no sorrow. We'd love a life that's free from pain and suffering. But there is something hopeful about knowing that we have a God who is not a stranger to our pain and not a stranger to our suffering and our sorrow, but he became a man of sorrow himself.
1, 2, 3, and...
That's hope right there. That's hope that we are not alone in our suffering, but Jesus actually knows what our suffering feels like. We're going to go through a few different pieces of good news that Good Friday brings to us. And the first piece of good news about Good Friday is Jesus knows our sorrow. Jesus knows the fear that uncertainty brings. He knows what it's like to be tempted, to experience anxiety, to feel depressed, to feel scared. Jesus, the God of the universe, was fully God, but he was also fully man. And so he knows the heavy weight that we can feel. You know, the weight of our current circumstances, whether external things that are happening to us or the weight of our own sin that we intentionally bring into our lives that separate us from God, can be a heavy weight. And honestly, we can't lift it on our own, but the good news about Good Friday is Jesus says, no, you don't have to lift that weight on your own. I'm not just here to empathize with you, but I'm here to actually come alongside you and to carry that weight with you through whatever you're going through so that you don't have to bear the full weight all on your own. Jesus knowing our sorrow is good news because it means that our God is not distant, but that he has a deep love for us.
How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that he should give his only Son to make a wretch his treasure. How great the pain of searing loss, the Father turns his face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Oh, yeah. Behold the Lamb upon a cross, my sin upon his shoulders. Ashamed, I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. And it was my sin that held him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished. I know that it is finished.
And that's good news number 2 about Good Friday, that Jesus loves us. It's something that, you know, we all kind of know instinctively, and we've heard it said. There's that popular Bible verse, John 3:16, which even if you haven't gone to church, you probably know. It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son." Maybe you went to Sunday school and you grew up singing that song, "Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so." It's something that we kind of know, but we need to remind ourselves every single day. Jesus loves us. And because of Good Friday, we see that in his actions. We see that that is actually true. It's not just lip service. It's something that he actually showed us. The terrible death that Jesus died on the cross, that was supposed to be my death. That was supposed to be our death. The weight that he bore on the cross was supposed to be ours to bear. But because of his great love for us, you and me, we don't have to die. We don't have to die. The God of the universe did that for you and me. I want you to come with me for a second as I talk about something. You know, we live in a culture that kind of idolizes celebrities, right? Like, we would pay ridiculous amounts of money to go backstage and see our favorite pop culture icons and spend 30 seconds with them to get a picture taken and then to leave and be forgotten by them forever. Like that's something that most of us, I would say, we would be willing to do if it was somebody that we cared about and followed. But here's the deal, as Christ followers, as Jesus followers, we actually have a God who gives us unlimited access to Him. He cares about us more than anyone else ever will, and He wants us to live with Him forever. I mean, think about that. When we look throughout history and we think about people's conceptions of God throughout history, people since the dawn of time have had this kind of wrong conception about God, that He is far off and that He is distant, kind of how we view celebrities, right? That He's far off and distant and I have to sacrifice or I have to pay to get to them. But here's the reality, and the good news about Good Friday is that Jesus paid the price to come to us. Jesus bore the weight we needed to bear to come to you and me. Because the biblical truth of that song that we just sang is that we have a God who is the one true God, but He loves us so much that He would be willing to sacrifice for us rather than asking us to sacrifice for Him. And this is so important because this God who loves us is also willing to sacrifice His own life for us. I mean, who do you know that would be willing to sacrifice their life for you? Probably not many people. But this God who needs nothing, has everything, said, I want to lay down my life for you, for me. This God who was willing to sacrifice it all, He also has all the power, which means that nothing is impossible for Him. Nothing's impossible for Him. There's no weight He can't take off your shoulders. There's no, as long as you have breath in your lungs, there's no mistake or wrong choice that He can't forgive. There is nothing, as Paul says in the book of Romans, in Romans 8:28, he says that nothing can separate you from the love of God, neither height nor depth. Nothing can separate you from the love of God, which brings us to our third piece of good news about Good Friday, is that nothing is impossible for God. Nothing's impossible for Him. And really, that's the ultimate answer to our question. How can something bad, like the death of Jesus on the cross, an innocent man, be labeled as good? It's that God has the kind of power that can take a bad situation and change its intended outcome and use it for good. Because Good Friday is really only good because it's actually not the end of the story. The end of the story is why we celebrate Easter, when 3 days later Jesus rises from the dead, conquering sin and death forever. But we're not going to jump to that because we're going to celebrate that just in a few days on Easter Sunday. What we want you to know now is that Good Friday is good news because in the middle of what you're going through now, in the middle of the muck and mud that you're standing in the middle of the mountain that seems impossible to climb, it's not the end of the story. And it's never over until our God says it's over. Jesus is with us in our sorrow. Jesus loves us, and there's no evil that His love cannot conquer.
was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. Yeah. You have been so, so kind. Yes, oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Yeah. No shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, there's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Yeah.
I just want you to know that whatever situation you're in right now, is that Jesus wants to break through right into that. And he wants to get in the middle of the mess with you. He wants to be with you. He wants you to know that his love is real. It's not this fake, superficial kind of love, but it's a love that actually counts when it matters most. And that he can take anything that you're going through, anything that I go through, and use it for his glory and for your good. So ultimately, I don't have a lot of practical application for you other than to know the answer to our question that we started all of this off with. Why is Good Friday good? It's because the story's not over, and your story isn't over either.